Hello there and welcome back to the Music Career Show. So today's episode is going to be a bit of a different one in that it is the first episode that does not feature a guest. A first scheduled episode that does not feature a guest, in that it is just going to be me all on my Toblerone for today. I've chosen to do that because Today as I'm recording this is Thursday the 5th of October, and in 2 days time on Saturday the 7th of October is going to be the first anniversary of the Music Career Show, with the first 5 episodes being released on the 7th of October 2022. Since then I've had a new guest on every single week. It's been an absolute it's been one of the most fun things and one of the most rewarding things that I have ever done, and I thought to mark the 1 year anniversary of the Music Career Show I should come on and have my own episode. I did toy with the idea of having a co-host, someone to interview me, but then I kind of thought that was a little bit sort of pretentious and a bit sort of, I don't know, strange. And I thought, who best to talk about myself than myself? So this episode is going to be completely and utterly unscripted. I'm just going to start at the very, very start. I'm going to try and be as critical critical in the sense, I was going to say I'm going to be as critical of myself as possible, critical in the sense of I'm going to try and use my experiences to offer you, the listeners and the viewers, some useful, helpful guidance and advice, as I always do with all of my guests. And stick around at the end for a bit of an announcement. Announcement, you say? So, for those of you that are possibly being introduced to me for the first time, if this is your first episode of the Music Career Show, my name is Barry Carroll. I am 30 years old. I'll be 31 in a week and a bit, in 10 days time. I'm originally from a town called Edenderry, which is in County Offaly, right in the middle of the Republic of Ireland. So if people are asking, is that north or south? It is in the Republic of Ireland, so imagine Dublin, but go kind of west, inland for about an hour, and that's roughly where I'm from. I was born and raised there, and I always was into music. My dad is into music in a reasonably big way. He loves Fleetwood Mac, the Eagles, Bob Seger, all that stuff, Bryan Adams, Bon Jovi. And I grew up listening to all of that. My ma loves ABBA and Chicago. She used to listen to a lot of Chicago when I was growing up, and an awful lot. And when we were in the car, the CDs that were always on were the 100 greatest power ballads and driving rock anthems and dad rock and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up listening to all old classic rock, which at the time, growing up in the 90s and the 90s, was old at the time. So 30 years later, it's definitely old now. I always wanted to be a musician, regardless of whether I knew I wanted to play guitar or not. I always wanted to be a musician because I just thought it was such a cool thing. Even before I ever learned how to play guitar, even before I ever got my first guitar, I just always thought it was such a cool thing to be involved in. I kind of just thought that sort of aligned with how I was made, how I was made up, and how I was built, and what my take on the world was. A few of my mates in school were learning how to play guitar, and I thought, I'd like to get a guitar. So for Christmas, when I was 13, so I just turned 13, so this would have been Christmas, so what's 23 minus, so this would have been Christmas 2006, I'd say. Christmas 06, Santi brought me my first ever acoustic guitar, and it was a Burnswood acoustic guitar beginner pack. I think I actually still have some of the original spare strings that came with that guitar up in my attic there somewhere. That original guitar exists somewhere. I feel it's in my granny's. I feel I might have borrowed it to my auntie at some point. I have a feeling it's also strung left-handed, and I'm 99% certain that was the guitar that I got everybody to sign on my last day of secondary school. So that guitar is still there. And that was really the start of it. I remember getting it and kind of being frustrated with it on the first couple of days because I didn't really know what to do. I hurt my fingers and just not really sure what to do. I remember coming across the B chord and just being like, even at 13, I was like, nah, fuck this. This isn't great. So when I went back to school after Christmas, one of the guys that was in my class, Arthur, who is still to this day a fantastic musician, he showed me how to read tabs. And that all of a sudden totally changed everything. Because I had spent the previous two and a half weeks over the Christmas holidays trying to figure out how to play guitar. And this was just at the start of like the internet starting to be useful for the everyday man. I think we were still on dial-up at the time. I don't think we were on broadband, but we're still. But I was able to go on the internet and search for how to play X, Y, and Z. I specifically remember starting off that same year that I got the guitar. I got Guns N' Roses' Greatest Hits, and I wanted to be able to play Sweet Child of Mine, and I kept on coming up against tabs. So, tabs, for anybody out there that isn't a guitar player, tabs stands for tablature, and it is specifically it's specific music notation for fretted stringed instruments such as guitars, mandolins, ukuleles, whatever else. And it simply just has a number on a line which corresponds to a string on the guitar, and the number corresponds to a fret, and it just tells you put your finger on the 12th fret on this string. And it's really, really simple to get your head around. But I had no idea what it was, because I was a total beginner guitar player trying to teach myself. And I specifically remember it. I remember trying to. I knew what chords were. I knew the chords were a thing. So I was thinking, I just need to look what Sweet Child of Mine chords are, and that's it. And I kept on getting these tabs, and I was like, okay. So I was searching Sweet Child of Mine, no numbers. I had no idea what it was. So when I went back to school, Arthur showed me how to read tabs, and that totally changed everything. And I think one of the first songs I learned was American Idiot by Green Day. Now, it wasn't easy by any means at all, but because I could read the tabs, I could sort of figure out what the chord shapes were meant to be. And as soon as I made that first chord sound like something, that was it. I was hooked. I was totally hooked. Spent that next year literally playing guitar non-stop, just non-stop, to the point that I just wasn't doing anything else at all. I used to do karate, and I think I actually quit karate that year because I just didn't want to waste any time that wasn't playing guitar. Not that karate was a waste of time or anything else was a waste of time, but in my mind, if I wasn't playing guitar, I was wasting my time. Even if I was in school, I didn't have an opportunity to play guitar, that was wasting time as far as I was concerned at 13 years old. So that entire time So that entire time, that first year of my guitar playing, I had 6 guitar lessons, because my dad didn't want me to get an electric guitar before I'd had some lessons. So I went for lessons, and I learned how to play Stairway to Heaven. I learned that Van Halen, who were my favourite band before I ever knew what music was, which is another story that I'm sure I get to. They were very bluesy and stuff like that, and that was what I learned. And then for Christmas the following year, so this would have been Christmas 2007, I got an Epiphone Special 2 in, I think they might have called it Sunburst. It was a kind of red sunburst. It was nice. And a Roland Cube 15. To this day, one of the worst amplifiers I've ever played through. It was horrible, but it was an electric guitar. It made loads of noise. That if the acoustic guitar that I got in the year before hadn't sealed the deal that I was going to be a musician, this definitely did. Nothing else mattered as far as I was concerned. I was playing this guitar, and that was it. So that was me the whole way up through school. And I was never popular in school. In fact, I was quite unpopular in school. People didn't seem to like me. I was never overly fussed, I didn't think. I think I was very much aware that I was a bit of a class clown. And I just sort of, if I think back on it now, I think I just kind of accepted that was just the way I was. And if people didn't like me, that was their problem. And I think I'm very, very lucky to have had that sort of resilience and that sort of mindset instilled in me, that I didn't need to change who I was to be popular or whatever it was. I was just happy enough doing my own thing. Up until about 5th or 6th year, maybe coming towards 5th year, that I started to get really good at music and started to get noticed for being good at music and started joining bands with some of the popular guys. One of my first bands was, I was always in bands. One of the first ones that really sort of started going somewhere was a band originally called the Blastberries, which I to this day I still think is such a cool name. I loved the name the Blastberries, and it was myself, 2 of my best mates, John and Peter McNevin, who are twins. I was at Peter's wedding in just over the summer. I was at John's stag then a couple of weeks previous, and I'm going to be at John's wedding in a couple of weeks' time. And then the lead singer was a guy called James Mackey, who was one of the more popular lads in school, and not someone who I ever would have thought would have given me the time of day, not because of anything he did or said. It was just kind of who he was associated with, his sort of place in the food chain in school. And all of a sudden one day I can't really remember how it happened, but we came together and we formed a band, the two lads, and we were called the Blastberries. And at the age of 15, 16, we were gigging in the local pubs in Edenderry at the weekend. So we were in school on Monday to Friday, and then Friday night we'd be out gigging in the pubs, and it was absolutely amazing. We changed our name then to Santos. We had a couple of original songs. We never really recorded anything, but we had a lot of fun. There's still some of those old videos are on YouTube. I put one up very recently, and we were a good band. We were solid. We were tight. James is a very, very talented singer songwriter. John and Peter were just very, very naturally talented. John especially never really gave much consideration to playing anything overly complicated or anything kind of fancy, but just very, very naturally gifted lads. And then there was me I was just mad to play guitar and just be a rock star. So I was willing to put the work in at any cost. Then from Santos, I started a band with Peter and with another guy called Kevin Cronley, who to this day is still one of my best mates. Peter and Kev were both, I was going to say bridesmaids, groomsmen at my wedding, and we called it V3. For the longest time we didn't have a name, but I started playing acoustic guitar, Kev was the singer, and Peter played the cajon. We called ourselves V3 because someone suggested that Jesus, you're the next thing after you too, so we called ourselves V3. And that was really, really, really where my music career started to take off. At the age of 17, 18, we started gigging pretty much every weekend consistently. We were actually getting paid up until now. We were getting paid for the odd gig, but a lot of it was like supporting like local bands. Frantic Jack were a huge band in Edenderry at the time. How are you boys, if there's any chances they're listening? We used to support them. We used to do a lot of stuff with them and the kind of the local music scene in Edenderry. If there was a trailer on the back, people in Ireland will know what I mean, but if there was the back of a lorry parked up in a town anywhere, that we were there. But when V3 came along, we were still there on the back of the lorries, but we were actually getting paid to play, and we started playing a lot of 18ths, a lot of our friends' 18th birthday parties, a lot of our friends' 21st birthday parties as it came along. Yeah, we were doing really, really well. That was, as far as I'm concerned, that was my first ever job. I'd always tell people that I never really had a job until I was 21, which is 100% true, in the sense that I never had a job that I had to report to someone. I had to go in and work in a shop stacking shelves or whatever everybody else does, pumping petrol or whatever it is. My first thing I ever got paid to do was playing music. And then from there, I finished up in school and I went to Pulse Recording College in Dublin, where I studied sound engineering. Now, I was only 17 when I started college, because that was just the age I was. I was nearly 18. I was 18. I was only 17 in college for like a month, maybe 6 weeks. And all the while gigging at the weekends and working my way up to build some sort of a career as a musician for myself. I really enjoyed sound engineering to a point. It was, in some ways, it was fantastic because it taught me so much about the music industry. It taught me so much about different workflows. It taught me so much about the fact that no matter if I'm working in an office doing spreadsheets, or if I'm recording a session with Guns N' Roses, I still need to be organised. I still need to know how to save files, how to name files, how to... There's so many like kind of crossover things that you need for, regardless of whether you're a rock star or an accountant. And it really put that into perspective for me, that music could be a viable career. I was always kind of not discouraged. I was never discouraged by any means. I was always told to have a backup plan, because music would be a very, very hard, unreliable career. And the people that told me that were not wrong. But I would still have it. I still wouldn't have it any other way. I'd go through the hardship all over again to still be able to say that I'm a musician and I play guitar every day for a living, and that's my job. So yeah, when I was in college, I enjoyed sound engineering to a point in that I was interested in it. I loved learning about the music industry, but at the end of the day, I wanted to be on the performing side of things, and I had very, very little interest in recording people performing. I wanted to be the one being recorded. So I done sound engineering for 2 years, met some lifelong friends, one of which was the very first episode of this podcast, Aisling Jarvis. And after that, I was gigging one night in Edenderry with the lads. And a girl called Sarah from Edenderry, who happened to be in the pub that night, came up and said to us we were very, very good. Had we ever thought about going abroad and performing abroad? And I was just about finished college, and I had no plans as to... I had no idea what my next move was going to be. I was only 19 at the time. It was only a 2-year course that I did, and because I started when I was 17, I was then going to be a fully qualified adult at the age of 19, and God knows what I was going to do. So I thought, fuck it, yeah, I'd love to go abroad. So without getting into the nitty gritty of it, I ended up in Salou with a mate of mine called Shane. Myself and Shane were hired to play an entire season in Salou. And our first night, we got in, and in Danny Boy, if anybody's ever been to Salou, Danny Boy was where I used to play. Danny Boy, Patrick's and Temple Bar. The very, very first night, myself and Shane went up, and we got 2.5 songs in, and that was it. We were asked to stop because we were absolutely terrible. So that was terrifying. That was absolutely terrifying because at 19 years of age, number one, I had never been away from home by myself. Just never had been. I'd never had a job that wasn't playing music. So literally, when I say the job was, it was literally you rock up to a pub at 10 o'clock, you set up, you start at 10:30, finish at 12:30, scull a rake of pints while you're at it. In every sense of a conventional job, it just didn't fit in, but that was my job. Whereas I had a bit more responsibility in this one, and this was the first time I'd ever had that responsibility. I was playing in Irish pubs, and I was reared on the likes of Van Halen, like I said, Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses. I didn't know any Irish songs at all, and that was what I was expected to play a lot of the time, was Irish songs. So yeah, I spent 2 weeks literally learning every Irish song I possibly could. Myself and Shane had a couple of opportunities here and there to just kind of build up our chops, because in fairness, the company that had hired us had hired musicians because they needed musicians, and as far as they were concerned, the roster was full. So they were just as kind of hard pressed, they were kind of in a way just as snookered as we were, because all of a sudden one of the acts that they had hired for the season was no good. So it was in their best interest for us to get better, and we had a couple of opportunities here and there, but we had never really performed together, and we never really gelled together. As a two-piece. Shane was at the time 5 or 6 years older than me, so he was sort of heading towards mid to late 20s, and I was 19. That could have been an awful lot to do with it. Shane had experience of this sort of thing before, and thought and kind of sort of had a predetermined idea of how these things should work, and I don't think it kind of sat overly well with him that it didn't work out that way. I don't know, maybe it did, it didn't. But one day I woke up and he had gone home because he had just had enough. He had an opportunity elsewhere, and that was it. And so I was kind of stuck, and literally I was on my last 20 euros, and that was it. I tell the story that I was on my last 20 euros. I don't know if I was on my last 20 euros, 200 euros or 2 euros, but I was in dire straits. And I'd been there 2 weeks, and I hadn't earned anything really other than a couple of pints and maybe a bit of grub here and there. Because I was a musician, I wasn't paying for accommodation, I wasn't paying for food and drink and all that kind of crack. So it wasn't too bad. But I was still running out of money very, very fast, and needed to start earning fairly, fairly quick. And one evening I went in for my dinner in Temple Bar, and Blackie, who was the manager of Patrick's at the time, came in and says, Cotsy's let me down for tonight. Cotsy's not well. He's not able to play tonight. How are you fixed to do a gig? I says, oh, jeez, I don't know. And he says, well, Jason's over there as well. How would the two of you be fixed to do a gig together? Jason was in a band called the Shamrockers, whose, as it turned out, his bandmate hadn't worked out either. So Blackie put myself and Jay together. We played a gig that night. We never practiced, not once. Literally, I went in at 5 o'clock to get me or it might even have been about 5 or 6 o'clock to get me dinner. And by 9 o'clock that night, we were on stage together. And as they say, the rest is history. We very, very quickly gelled. Now, Jason is 5 or 6 years older than me. How are you, Jay, if you're listening? So sort of same sort of potential dynamic as myself and Shane, but thanks be to God, Jason was an awful lot more immature than Shane was. So we gelled, and myself and Jay became we became the best of friends very, very quick. We gelled. Jason was a good lad. He sort of took me under his wing. He had a lot of experience performing. And he took me under his wing and he really showed me the ropes, and for that I will be forever grateful. So if you're listening, Jay, you're a good egg. Thanks very much. And that was it. We just started gigging and we got better every single gig, and like we were only ever paid to play three hours. We were paid to play from 10 at night till 1 in the morning. And I often remember seeing 3 o'clock in the morning and no sign of us stopping. All the rest of the musicians used to hate us because we were putting on these mental shows, really high energy. I used to jump up on the tables. We used to take our shirts off. We used to go mental, absolutely berserk, drove people wild. And the rest of the musicians were like, fuck, we have to keep up with this. Now, the rest of the musicians were far superior in musicality and musicianship and showmanship and professionalism, and in every other way they were worth far more than we were. But we used to just have like the most fun it is possible for any human being to have. It was the best experience of my whole life, and I think about it literally every single day. So that was 2012. I arrived there on, I think it was the 11th of June. I think it was the 11th of June, and I left the 17th of November. Don't quote me on those dates, but it's close enough. And then I kind of spent the winter started trying to figure out what I was going to do. Was I going to go back and do another season in Salou? Was I going to go somewhere else? Was I going to maybe try and go to America? What was I going to do? Was I going to go and spend the winter in Andorra? Because that was, back in the day when I was doing this, that was the sort of done thing. You done the summer in Salou, and then for the winter months when everything's closed, you go off to Andorra and do somewhere with the ski resorts. I went home anyway. So I went home anyway, and I just continued to gig for the remainder of the winter until April rolled around, and myself and my best mate Paddy went back to Slough. Paddy started working in Danny Boy in the bar, and he was one of the guys out on the door that used to get people into the pub, and Paddy was fantastic at it. And myself and Jay went back gigging. The second year in 2013 was harder because I was a little bit older, little bit more wise. Maybe wise is not really the way to put it, but a bit more mature. Little bit more mature in that I was very much aware that this was probably not the most sustainable career, given the fact that the way we were doing it, we were playing 7 nights a week. We were playing 7 nights a week for 6 months of the year. We were out drinking every single night. Like, we used to get up at 7 o'clock at night, go and get a bit of dinner into us, go and play our gig, and then stay up until 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning the next day, and then go and do it all over again. And that was every single night for 6 months. That wasn't sustainable, for starters. And anyone listening, it sounds like great fun, but I promise you there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And that took a toll on you. In fact, it took such a toll on my voice that I don't believe it ever fully recovered. To this day, I don't think it's ever fully recovered. But I never got a chance to properly recuperate from that until the pandemic, when we couldn't go out and gig. So that's how much of a toll it took on my body at the age of 20. So you can imagine if now at the age of 30, nearly 31, if I was still doing it, I'd be knackered. I'd be fucked. Like, it'd be just a waste of time altogether. So that sort of lifestyle wasn't sustainable. It is definitely sustainable. Anybody out there listening that thinks that a career as a resort entertainer, I suppose is what you'd call it, is thinking about a career as a resort entertainer, do it. It's honestly, it's absolutely fantastic. If you live in Scotland like I do, or if you live in Ireland, if you live in England or any of the rest of the UK, I genuinely believe that if you're living somewhere like over in Spain where the weather is just nicer for longer, do you know what I mean? It's a better, I genuinely believe it's a better quality of life. You don't get paid as much, but you don't need as much. I would advise everybody to do it, but I would advise everybody to do it in a sensible way. But lo and behold, anyway, my second season came to an end in 2013, and I went home not long after my birthday in 2013, and I was then at a big time crossroads because I genuinely didn't believe that I was going to go back a third year in a row. Like I said, too much of a good thing. It just sort of lost its appeal towards the end of 2013. I was happy, I was happy to be finishing up. I was looking forward to finishing up. I was looking forward to getting back to some sort of routine. Towards the end of my second season, we did sort of try and get into some sort of a routine, and we did a lot more things during the day and didn't go wild as much all night. But I knew that it was always going to have to come to an end, and I was happy enough when it did come to an end. While I was in Salou in 2013, I met my now wife, Lauren. Obviously, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she is now. And we'd been texting back and forth and stuff like that. So when I went home in October, we kept in touch, and eventually we met up in January of that year. And towards the end, and by October 2014, I had moved to Aberdeen, where Lauren is from, and that's where I am now. I'm still here 9 years later. But yeah, then in 2014, some stuff happened. So a lot of stuff happened in 2014. First one being that I got my first ever job. My first ever job that wasn't playing music in an off license in Edenderry. And I think I was there for a grand total of 4 weeks. And I was the worst employee that anybody had ever had. I literally just sat there. I went, with my first week's wages, I went and bought myself a mandolin. And I took it into work then the next day, and I got in trouble for sitting there playing guitar because people were going into the shop, and then so the shop was attached to a pub called Fives where I used to play, and people were going in. They'd be coming from the pub into the shop to buy cigarettes or whatever, and then they'd be going back in and telling the owner, "Oh, your man's in there playing guitar or whatever." And so I was terrible. I just wasn't meant to. I'm just not meant for that type of work. I just don't have the mentality for it, unfortunately. Even at the ripe old age of 31, I'm still a child on the inside. So I was working away, and then I got the opportunity to go and tour America. So I did. First tour was in New York. We played a couple of dates with a guy called Dan O'Sullivan, who I've mentioned on the podcast a couple of times. To this day, the best musician I've ever played with, Dan O'Sullivan. Played tin whistle, uilleann pipes, a little bit of guitar. And after that, I managed to do a few gigs with him at home in Ireland, doing the Irish dance party, which is so much fun, but that's a story for another day. But I was gigging away with Dan, then I was gigging away with a guy called Cormac McGuinness, and we played in Atlantic City, we played in Washington DC, where else did we play? Tampa Bay. We had great crack. It was absolutely fantastic. And then I went back to America again, and the second time I was there for much longer. And myself and Kevin Cronley, my old best mate, we went the first time. We'd done 2 weeks in Washington DC. Then myself and I can't remember what I did in the interim, but I think it was in Atlantic City again, myself and Cormac, and then we went back to DC for another 2 weeks, where on our very last night, the first time we were there, on our very last night, we met the Foo Fighters and drank pints with Dave Grohl all night. It was amazing. It was absolutely one of the coolest things ever. I think I've talked about it. I definitely have talked about it on the podcast before. It's like literally the first thing I say to people when I meet them. Hello, my name is Barry. I've drank pints with Dave Grohl. Do you know what I mean? So that was fun. So all the while that this was going on, I was really trying to, I was working as a musician, and I was fulfilling my dreams, for lack of a better term, and I was literally living like a rock star the way I always wanted to do. But I wasn't building a career for myself. To an extent, I was looking back on it now. None of the things that I was doing were really helping me solidify myself as a musician, because I wasn't taking it seriously enough. Of course, I wanted to have a career as a musician, but the way I was going about it just wasn't good enough. We weren't taking it seriously enough. It was just one big session. Like, that was literally, we used to treat it as if we were going out for pints, and then songs just happened, which is still a phrase I use to this day. But anyway, so then at the end of this time in 2014, I went and moved to Aberdeen, and I started working in an Irish pub and started gigging in an Irish pub, and that was really where I was able to, and then that was me just sort of kind of trucking along for the next few years. Lauren, my wife, had told me that there wasn't really that much of a music scene in Aberdeen, and at the time there really wasn't. Not that I was aware of anyway, not one that would suit me. Of course, I played in all the Irish pubs I loved playing in the Irish pubs, and I used to hate, like, I used to take, because the only thing I was ever qualified to do was sound engineering or playing music, and I always wanted to play music. Any jobs in sound engineering, I turned them down because they were getting in the way of my gigs. So I was left with no choice really but to take on whatever job I could get, basically. Started working in Malone's in the Irish pub that I still play in to this day. And again, I was useless. I went to work on boats as a labourer. Useless, absolutely useless. Just couldn't turn my hand to stuff. Just could not get my head into the fact that I needed to do what I was told. I needed to be there on time. I needed to not slack off. Do you know what I mean? I needed to not be on my phone looking up guitars all the time. I just couldn't get my head around that at all. Then I went and worked in with kids with autism, and to this day, that was my favorite job ever. Other than this, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was in a school called Linmore and a place called Peter Cooter, just about half an hour away from where I am, and it was the best job I'd ever had. I was working with kids all day with autism. I was a key worker for a kid. I loved it. I loved every single thing about it. But yet again, me being me, just not being able to get into the swing of things, I was lucky to not be sacked from that job. So I had to leave. I had to move on. All the while that I was doing all these jobs that I didn't want, music was still trugging away in the background. I used to look forward to the weekends, and I used to gig Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I could have 5 or 6 gigs over a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, meaning that there were weeks and months where I had literally worked every single day for 5-6 weeks at a time, just because music was who I really was, and I had to wait until the weekends to actually be who I really was. What I was doing during the week was just something that I did just to keep myself out of trouble more than anything else. But when I got to the weekends, I was Barry. I was Barry Carroll, musician, whatever. And I was working away on becoming a better musician. In that time, I learned how to play drums with my feet. So while I was playing guitar and harmonica, I was playing drums with my feet. So I called myself the One Lad Band instead of the One Man Band. And that's where the name of my company eventually came from. One Lad Music Academy, because I was One Lad Band. So I had a couple more jobs. I eventually went into family support. And again, I didn't overly enjoy that job, but it wasn't too bad. But me being me, made a balls of it again. Left that job, went on to work in a nursery. I loved the workplace. I loved the people I was working with. I loved the kids that I was working with, but I hated the job. I just hated what I was being asked to do, and I felt terrible. I felt so bad and guilty every single day for not enjoying being there, because I knew that I was dragging everybody down. So much so that I just became so depressed that one day I went to go into work, and I just broke down crying in the car. That I just couldn't. I went and pulled up to the gate. No matter what I could have done, no matter what I done, I couldn't drive in. I just could not drive in. If I'd not turned the car around, I'd still be stuck there in front of the gate, just not being able to go in. Because I just knew this was not who I was meant to be. It wasn't what I was meant to do. I was not. I was a musician trapped in an everyday person's body, and I mean that with as much love as possible. I don't mean to. There's nothing wrong with being an everyday person at all. I wish I could be an everyday person. It would make life so much easier for myself. But I just can't. I had to be a musician, and that's just what I have to do. Not long after that, I was working. I was preparing snack one day, and as I was doing constantly, I was DOSing on my phone, and I happened across a job for a guitar teacher, and I thought, fuck it. What's the worst can happen? I go along and try it, and I don't like it. So I went along, met the guy and his partner, and on the way home that evening, I phoned Lauren and says, this is it. This is 100% it. And it was. It really was. That was in kind of November, December 2019. Myself and Lauren had gotten married the August previous, and it was at that point I was like, I need to sort my life out. I cannot write down on my marriage certificate nursery worker or whatever it was that I was classed as, because I was like, that's just not who I am. That's not who I am. So I wrote down musician, despite the fact that I wasn't really a career musician. I was only gigging at the weekends. But as I said, fast forward to November, December 2019, and took a job as a guitar teacher, and very, very quickly I was able to reduce my hours in the nursery. That I started teaching for this crowd in maybe kind of January-ish January-ish 2020, and by you can see where this is going. And then by March 2020, I had left my job in the nursery entirely and went full on into the guitar teaching. 2 weeks later, the whole world closed down. What can you do? So over the course of the pandemic, I was working for this company as a guitar teacher. I was going to people's houses. Well, over the pandemic, we weren't going to people's houses at all. We were teaching online. I was the first staff member, so between myself and the boss, we had to figure out how to teach online. We had to figure out how to operate the business in this manner. And it was a real trial by fire. I really had to learn quick about business, about how to be adaptable, about how to teach guitar. For years, Lauren had told me leading up to this, would you not think about teaching guitar? And I just genuinely didn't think I had the patience or the interest to teach people how to play guitar. So I just didn't. And without getting into too many of the details, I learned everything I know. Well, not everything I know. I learned so much in that year and a half that I was with that company. I learned far more about what not to do and how not to treat people, because they were terrible people in the end. But it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I came out of it far better. So in April of 21, I started my own business called One Lad Music Services. I started teaching people out of my little studio here in my garden. I've not looked back since. Over the past couple of years since I've been operating, I very quickly was able to take on some freelance tutors that worked along with me. They were going out and about to students' houses. I was teaching here in my studio. I built that up, and unfortunately I ended up making an awful lot of the same mistakes that the last crowd I worked for had made, and I now work by myself again, and that didn't pan out the way I would have liked it to have panned out. But yet again, I just had to learn the hard way. I think there's a bit of a pattern that you can hopefully see emerging about me, is that I always have to learn the hard way, and I have learned the hard way. But since then, since building up the company to where it was, to eventually to where it got to, and me not being able to manage it anymore and having to basically start again, I've come back stronger than I think ever before, and I am thrilled with where the business is now. This time last year, I started my podcast. I wanted to be like a one-stop shop for all things music related. So whether you were picking up your guitar for the first time or the millionth time, I wanted to be able to offer you something. And that was why I started the podcast, because I wanted to speak to people who have, in my eyes, made it or made a career out of music. They don't have to be big, massive, big names. I've had some huge names, and I'm grateful for every single name that I've had on this podcast, but some of them have been bigger than others. And I wanted to speak to others to find out how they made a career out of music, so that you guys out there could also be inspired by these people. And I'd like to just now take however long it takes to name every single person that has been on the podcast and to thank them. So maybe if you don't want to hear a load of names, skip on about a minute. So from first to last, these are the people that have appeared on my podcast, and I am forever grateful to all of them. Aisling Jarvis, Mikey Dalton aka Seba Safe, the Black Donnellys made up of Dave Rooney and Dave Brown, Dan Baker, an absolute legend, Declan McGuinness, who is the founder of Fan Club, Sophie Burrell, an absolute delight, Dagan Wilkin, great crack altogether. Brendan Power, another hero of mine that plays harmonicas all the time. Pete Farmer, an absolute hero of mine, inventor of the Farmer foot drum. Colin Gavin, another old friend of mine who taught us all about how to find your audience, and it was amazing. Marcus Stretz, who is a producer, really, really interesting episode there. David Benedict, mandolin player. Isabel Anderson, who is the female DIY musician. Meg Legrand, who I've actually since met in real life and had a night out with, and she is amazing crack. Hello, Meg. Rory Gallagher, not the Rory Gallagher, the other Rory Gallagher, all the way from Donegal. He was in the Revs, he now lives in Lanzarote. Legend, absolute legend. Josh Turner, just all round music legend. Derek Dempsey, the absolute, the undisputed king of Times Square. Chetel Linus, the one-man wonder. Dan Hawkins, Charlotte Campbell taught us how to get onto Love Island. Linz Crichton, who turned out to be the loveliest person. I went and done a chat for her cohort, and yeah, it was great. Joe Kenny, one of the funniest guys going. Stephanie Burton, who Cutie Pie, Tin Whistle on YouTube, who I ended up doing a collaboration of Freed from Desire with, and that was so much fun. Pete Rust, another one of my old pals from college. Jamie Humphries, legend, and Brian May's guitar player. Like, do you know what I mean? Not that Brian May needs a guitar player, but there he is. Kieran Cooney, an old pal from back in the day. Raz Palumbi, also known as Raz Vio. She plays a flying V violin. It's amazing. Christina Bauer, who is like the German version of me, wants everyone to have a career in music. Leilani Kilgore, who was the most fun to chat to. Jordana Delgado, absolutely gorgeous person inside and out. Rob Brown, the coolest motherfucker going. Brooksy Wells, absolute badassery. Johnny Wilson, who was one of my absolute idols. Nicola Canton. Josh Haberfield, I mispronounced his name and said Haberfield. Sorry, Josh. Myself and Josh need to get a pint. Josh, if you're listening. Peter Dankelson, one of the most inspirational people I've ever spoken to. Philippa Cookman, another friend of mine now. Mary Spender, who was just an absolute joy to speak to. JJ Lovegrove, her maiden name is Nolan, and we had great chats just before I went off to see Bruce Springsteen. Isabel Austin, who is a good friend of Meg LeGrand and who I also shared a night out with and had the most fun. Mike Grande, who is now my absolute, he's like the uncle everybody needs, and he is just the most amazing guy. Sent me a present and everything. Ben Cody, we totally just geeked out over Van Halen. It was amazing crack. Tim Topman, Tim the Top Man Toppin. Michelle Joyce, guitar goddess, another absolute delight of a person. Jeff Podge, who I speak to weekly, who is one of a very good mate of mine now and a kind of business associate. Emma Taylor, she was unbelievable crack. Philip Joyce, an absolute legend of Irish guitar playing. Cody Joyce, another Joyce. Michelle Joyce's husband, aka Guitar Goddess, aka the groovy guitar dude. Emma Shaw, who was great crack. Sean Cunningham, whose father had an Irish pub in New York. Tin whistle player, brilliant. Ralph Robinson from Assenval. What a chat we had there recently. Melissa Wright, who I now kind of work for, whatever you want to call it, in her online school. And finally, last week's episode, Katie Ferrara. It's like Ferrari with an I. She has since broken her small cow-sized wagon, and it has been replaced by her lovely fans. Every single one of you has contributed to my business, to my life, to my overall musicianship in such a positive way, and I cannot thank you all enough. From the bottom of my heart, I really mean it. Which sort of brings us all up to present day. Now, as I said at the start, I've got a bit of an announcement. And I don't know whether it's a good or a bad thing, but it's a thing all the same. For the time being, I'm going to be taking a break from the podcast. Every week for the past year, I have done an episode of the Music Career Show with a guest. And I've loved every single second of it. I started this podcast out to make sure that I could help people just like you out there listening that really maybe don't really know where they're going in life in terms of music. They need something to turn to. They need some sort of guidance. They need some sort of help. I want to make sure that I'm doing the absolute best I can for you. And I also want to make sure that I'm making the most of this opportunity for myself as well. Because if let's face it, we don't do these things for the good of our health. Yes, they are beneficial to us. But you always want to make sure that you're doing the absolute best job that you possibly can. And I'm very much of that mindset. So for the time being, I've decided to take a break and call this the season finale of season 1 of the Music Career Show. I am really hoping to get back before the end of 23, if not early 24, with a hopefully improved format, some new guests, new topics. I want to introduce different sections to the podcast. I want more input from you guys, the listeners. In fact, I want input from you guys, the listeners, full stop. I've never given anybody an opportunity to give their input. So this is now a good time to plug. If you have a topic for the Music Career Show that you would like me to speak about, then by all means send me an email, podcast@oneladmusic.com. I would absolutely love to hear what your thoughts are on the podcast, who you would like to see on the podcast, what sort of issues are you coming up against in your music career that I could maybe tackle on the podcast. Maybe I could find a guest that would tackle. I want to have a section every week where I read out some correspondence, if there's correspondence to read out. I would love to hear from you guys. I do this for you guys. I would love to hear from you. So those are all things that I have in the pipeline. At the moment, I am very, very busy with the new format of my business. I'm getting busier every single week, and I couldn't be happier about it. And I want to be able to focus on that, and I really want to be able to give my all to this podcast because I love it so much. So normally I would finish off with some quick fire round questions, but I don't really think that's going to be any crack me asking myself questions. So until I'm talking to you guys again, my name is Barry. This is the season finale of season 1 of the Music Career Show. I will see you all again, hopefully before the end of 23, and if not, in early 24. As I said, give me a shout, podcast at oneladmusic.com, or you can follow me on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all those good things. One Lad Music. Just put that in, you'll find me. There's only one of me. Thanks ever so much again for listening. I love all of ye, and I will see you hopefully sooner rather than later.